There it is, domino number one, the biggest thing for the Pacers off-season. Pascal Siakam and the Pacers have agreed to terms on a new contract in free agency. Huge news. We'll break it all down, the implications, the length, the money, everything on today's Locked On Pacers bonus podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Wednesday-ish. Whenever you hear this, it's the middle of the day Wednesday when this is going to come out. Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI. And today, the breaking news, the one that is the biggest box for the Pacers to check the offseason, has come across the line. Pascal Siakam and the Indiana Pacers have agreed to terms on a new contract, instantly making Siakam the biggest and best unrestricted free agent the Pacers have ever signed. Terms agreed to. We'll get to that in a second. Huge deal for Siakam and the Pacers to get this done quickly. It was one of the most no-brainer signings of any team in the league to keep their own guy, made possible by the new rule that teams can negotiate with their own free agents after the finals are concluded. We'll get into all of it today. Instant reactions and thoughts, the length, why that is very interesting to me. All sorts of stuff about this. It's official. It came across the desk from Adrian Wojnarowski this morning. Credit to Scott Agnes yesterday for having a story out about them nearing this agreement, and Woj this morning getting that it's a 4-year, $189.5 million deal. That's what Woj said. I've poked around, and it's no options in that deal. So the agreement is, to be very specific, 4 years at Siakam's maximum salary. And I'm being clear about that difference because if the salary cap comes in at a different number than the current projections, it will not be a $189.5 million deal. It will be a little different than that to some variation in any direction. But that is the current projections of what the framework would look like. And to get to $189.5 million, this deal would have to start at Siakam's maximum salary in the coming season, which is 30% of the salary cap, meaning for the next 4 seasons, Tyrese, Haliburton, and Pascal Siakam will make the exact same amount of money for the Pacers. And that was the huge deal. The second thing that I wanted to know and found out, no options. When I heard 4 years, that was one of the first things I wondered, was there a player option in there? The answer is no. Straight 4 years for whatever his maximum salary turns out to be when the salary cap is set in early July. It's done. So stop right there for a second and zoom out, because we got to get into the analysis of this in a second. Awesome for the Pacers, as big as it gets. Again, the best player that's an unrestricted free agent they've ever signed. Yes, he's returning to his incumbent team, but still, it is a massive deal for them to be able to have pulled this off and to keep a player who is just terrific for them in the regular season and playoffs. It makes the trade make even more sense. It already made a ton of sense to me, but make even more sense that they made in January. It sets them up for a window of multiple years of being a contender for something in the Eastern Conference with Tyrese, Haliburton, and Siakam and whatever other pieces they have around that team. That is a massive success and huge starting point for the Pacers, who now have a strong foundation of a contention-level team for the next however long you think this duo can do very well. And Haliburton's contract is, of course, even longer. Huge congratulations to them and to Siakam, who gets a max contract at age 30 after a great season. Will be paid handsomely for his services, that he is very good. He averaged 22 and 8 for the Pacers in both the regular season and playoffs. Very rarely has a bad game. Just a great player. Caitlin Cooper and I went deep on what makes him so good and why he fits with the Pacers and Haliburton yesterday. Very lucky, prescient timing from us if you want to listen to that. And it's done. The deal is done. So let me cut through the reactions in order and try to fend through this. And then I'll do a full-length podcast tomorrow. More about it and the implications of what it means for the rest of Pacers free agency, the rest of their free agents, the tax, all sorts of long-term team building stuff as we go. So the most surprising thing to me from this was the 4-year max contract for Pascal Siakam. If you remember when Tyler Smith and I did our Let's Preview Pascal Siakam's free agency episode, we both talked about 5-year deals. He's 30. This could be, maybe isn't. Ask Drew Holiday, who got a big deal at 30, and everybody said, ooh, that might look bad at the end. And then he got an even bigger deal at this year at age 34 or 35, whatever he is, right? I think he has to be 34. It doesn't matter, right? The years are fascinating to me at 4, but the Tyler and I discussion was centered on 5 because of his age, primarily, but because of reporting that suggested a max level deal was coming, and max to me is max years. This is not max years. This is max money, which is an important clarification. So that was the most surprising thing to me, because to me, the avenues that I expected, which was wrong, was either 5 years, the most money in the years Siakam could get, or a 2+1 kind of deal where he could get back out on the market with a higher cap environment and 10 years of service in 2 years. Instead, he opts for 4, which, without having asked Pascal Siakam, I'm very intrigued by and what it means to the Pacers, because the Pacers are probably happy to have it be 1 year shorter if it's fully guaranteed with no options. And of course, if he's amazing the whole time, this will cost them in the summer of 2028, because they'd have to pay him more than they would have if they got him on a 5-year deal, which is maybe a risk you're willing to live with as the Pacers. But if you're Pascal Siakam, I find 4 years as opposed to 5 very interesting. So his deal runs 1 year less than Tyrese Haliburton's does as of right now. Why 4 years? Good question. So I don't know. Again, I have not asked him. The first year salary of a deal Siakam could have signed with the Pacers or another team is the same max. The difference is raises, right? So he can get 8% raises with the Pacers and 5% with other teams. So his 4-year max with other teams is $181.89 million. His 4-year max with the Pacers is this number, $189.5, which of course those could fluctuate based on the cap. So maximizing his 4-year earnings, in theory, would have required a bunch of 1+1s, but that's stupid. So if he's actually thinking about one contract to maximize his 4-year earnings, this does that. And then his 5th year is where this gets interesting, because the salary cap in 2028-29, assuming 10% growth after this season every year, will be over $200 million. And his max salary would be over $70 million. And he certainly will not. Well, maybe, I guess, if he's still that good. But right now, if he just signed a 5-year max, he would get $55.8 million in that 5th year. So I guess there's potential for more 5-year earnings for Siakam in theory, and he makes more over 4 years with the Pacers than with other teams. So that does make sense to me. Thing 2 is there's a rule called the over 48 rule in the NBA, over 38 rule in the NBA, where you can't sign a contract that takes you beyond your age 38 season. Siakam turned 30 in April. So 4 years would put him at 34 and make him eligible for another 4-year deal as opposed to a 3-year deal. Perhaps that is part of the thinking on his end. And another factor, 4-year contracts and 3-year contracts can be extended after 2 years as opposed to 5- and 6-year deals, which can only be after 3 years. So that's relevant because as it stands right now, Pascal Siakam will become extension eligible in the summer of 2026. Now, granted, it still wouldn't start until 2028, but that's still noteworthy as opposed to anything else that could happen. And with a 140% raise on his salary, that would be more than his max in 2028-29 on a 5-year deal. So there are reasons it makes sense. It's not what I expected, but there are reasons it potentially makes sense for him. I hope that clears some of it up. And yet, that is all kind of ancillary to me. What matters is he's on the team. Pascal Siakam and the Pacers have agreed to terms, and Pascal Siakam and every Pacers starter from last season's Eastern Conference Finals team is now under contract once again next season. That is massive. That is huge. Let's talk about some basketball stuff. Let's talk about some other contract stuff. Not super detailed because, again, I'm going to do a much more in-depth show tomorrow. This is more instant reactions, but that is the contract. That is the why. The Pacers probably happy with 4 years instead of 5, just from a risk perspective, although you always like having good players for as long as possible. But 4 years of Pascal Siakam is awesome for the Pacers. And Kalen and I surmised yesterday why we think his game should age fairly well. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what this could look like, how it could go. Let's keep talking about it in just a second before we go more in on Pascal Siakam being back with the Pacers. Let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships like the Celtics is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You will always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Plus, With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Back once again here on Locked On Pacers, talking about Pascal Siakam re-signing, agreeing to a new deal with the team. I enjoyed hearing from Tyrese Haliburton over the weekend. I was at his camp and he was asked about it. He just got right to the point, similar to what he said at his exit interview. He said, we talk pretty often. Me and Pascal are really close. He knows how I feel. I want Pascal here. I'm going to do everything I can to keep him in a Pacers jersey. I love playing with him. We're going to do everything we can to bring him back. I don't have any doubts. He knows he's got a home here. That proved to be very prescient. He knew that he would be sticking with his teammate that he loves and loves playing with. Caitlin and I talked about their two-man game yesterday. And from a basketball perspective in the Pacers' pursuit of Siakam, I think that's a key part of all this. Even if you wanted to be the guy who questions what he's worth in a specific season or questions the timeline of the Pacers, which is now irrelevant to me. They're a contending team. Their timeline is good players, not young players. The questions are, does this player fit with Tyrese Haliburton? Are they additive to a Tyrese Haliburton Indiana Pacers team? No doubt that was the case for Siakam and the Pacers last year. Again, yesterday's podcast with Caitlin runs through a lot of these numbers. We talked about their on-offs together in the playoffs, in the regular season. I'll run through those again right now. But the reason that matters is if those two fit together and are good, that's pretty much the biggest and most important checkbox for the Pacers from a basketball perspective. They're the best two guys, and you build up from there. In the regular season, with both of them on the floor, the Pacers had a wonderfully good net rating, a 119 offensive rating with both of them off. They were -2, and they had a positive net rating with either one of them on the floor. This allows for staggering situations. It gives the Pacers 48 minutes of potency during the regular season, which is, of course, fantastic from night to night. In the playoffs, those numbers were so exaggerated. Plus 9.77 net rating with both of them on the floor in the postseason. Plus 7.2 with Haliburton on, Siakam off. Minus 6.63 in the Siakam on, Haliburton off. And then barely over 0 in like a few minutes with neither of them on the floor. They fit very well together. And in the most important setting for this team now, the team is at their best with their two stars on the floor, which matters so much. There's no fit concerns. There's no fit questions. There's no overlapping skills that make it hard to design what you want to do with this team. It's very simple. They're both very good. They play very well off of each other. If you're the Pacers, that's where you start. You say, we want that guy. We want to keep him. We will do whatever it takes. And the obvious best outcome of the summer was keeping him no matter what. Losing him would have been a disaster for the Pacers to me. They had no way of signing a player for $40-something million, even if they lost Siakam. And they have him now. He is on the team for the next 4 years. And this is quite a window. Things change in the NBA. You never have to acquiesce to a trade request, whatever. You never know. If you go back 4 years and look at the Pacers roster, you would die laughing at the difference between that and today. Their highest six paid players with $10 million or more 5 years ago were Malcolm Brogdon, Domantas Sabonis, Myles Turner, Karis LeVert, TJ Warren, and Jeremy Lamb. I bring that up to say that teams change often. And there were a lot of long contracts on the Pacers at that time. But that team was clearly in flux, going through coaching changes, figuring out how good they were. This current team is not in flux, and there are not questions about how good they are or what they can be with a young team. They're very good, and as it stands right now, the Pacers have 4 years of Siakam and Haliburton on the same team to go from there. These next couple of years will, of course, be about winning and trying to get back to the conference finals, if not farther. A very impressive season just happened for the Pacers that led to this moment. The next step is what fits around them, right? Chad Buchanan talked in his exit interview, end of season presser, whatever you want to call it, about the Nuggets and the Celtics and how they built piece by piece, right? Celtics get their two stars in a way different way than the Pacers, but still, and Tatum and Brown, and then they slowly get the rest of the guys who start around them. They trade for Derek White. They trade for Drew Holiday. They trade for Porzingis. They get Horford, then trade him away, or then he leaves, and then they trade back for Al Horford, right? The Nuggets, they get their guy in Jokic, and they get their guy in Murray, and then they trade for Aaron Gordon, and that's just how this all has worked for these teams. They trade for KCP, right? They did draft Michael Porter Jr. It's similar though. They get Bruce Brown in free agency. They build the pieces one by one around them to get to where they are. That is the next step for the Pacers. That is now possible and more plannable, for lack of a better term, because Pascal Siakam is on the team. From my basketball perspective, as good as it gets for the Pacers, who have a long runway to potentially figure these things out. 2 years from now, Siakam's extension eligible. In potentially 3 years from now, depending on all NBA appearances and awards, Haliburton could be eligible for a designated veteran extension, depending on how his next contract goes. This is something to build off of, and that is the next questions for the Pacers. But they can move to the next questions, and I think that is the biggest thing about this is they can move to the next stage of their team building. Rick Carlisle at his interview said this offseason, step one, priority one, whatever you want to call it, keep Pascal Siakam on this team. Tyrese Haliburton said recruiting, I'm going to do it. I'm going to text him. I'm going to call him. Chad Buchanan said, yes, this is a partnership we want to continue. Siakam said, I love that the city lives and breathes basketball. I'm a simple guy. I'm not going to talk business right now, but he did like it here in Indiana. And boom, now we're here. The parties have agreed. This is why you make that trade with 3 first-rounders, Bruce Brown and Jordan Nwora. Let's talk a little more about the contract, the structure, what's next, what alternatives are potentially there to close out this shorter show. Again, more details tomorrow on the big picture for the Pacers. Before we get to that, though, got to talk to you guys about FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NHL. Cool Stanley Cup going back to Edmonton. NBA Finals are over. WNBA's rocking. MLB, my fave, going crazy. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a huge win of your own in any of those. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets on FanDuel with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on whatever you like. Spreads, money lines, player props, MVPs of series, who's going to get the next home run, and plenty more. That's on FanDuel. If you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, you'll get that deal if you sign up and make every playoff shot count. Again, $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen for this quick, brief update on Pascal Siakam re-signing with the Pacers. Perhaps we get more details throughout the day, but either way, you'll get a longer podcast from me tomorrow, breaking this down in more detail, what it means for the rest of what they do, their proximity to the tax, how they should proceed for the rest of their offseason. But they got the big one done. That's a huge deal. Credit to everybody involved. They can pivot to other stuff now, which, again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Or if you're listening already on Thursday, there's probably another episode out for you to listen to about this. But Siakam, 4 years, amount TBD, likely near $190 million, depending on where the cap comes in. Playoffs did not have a lot of games. Not sure the cap will jump up a ton from the projections the NBA last got. We'll see. That's generally a way you can tell if it will bounce up or down. But Siakam is with the Pacers. $42.3 million is the current projection for the coming season. I think that the fact that this got done so fast, first deal announced, right? The only stuff we've heard since the finals are that Jeff Van Gundy's going to the Clippers, that Monty Williams got fired. Check out Locked On Pistons for that craziness. And that Siakam has re-signed with the Pacers. I mean, re-signed with the Pacers. I mean, that says a lot about it. The fact they could get it done so fast signals a lot. And I think the 4-year deal is an endlessly fascinating part of this that I can't wait to learn more about. But that's where the Pacers are. Him and Haliburton's contracts now lined up. If you wanted to stay, this gets done quick. Bada bing, bada boom. Now we're here. They can pivot to their next steps. Nembhard extension, if they can do it. McConnell extension, if they can do it. Obi Toppin's free agency. We'll see on the timing of that, how that's going to shake out. Doug McDermott, James Johnson floating out there. What are they going to do in the draft? I don't know, but it's a lot easier to make those decisions when you have Pascal Siakam on your team. As it stands right now, him and Haliburton at about $84 million of $181 for this coming season, a very large and well-earned percentage of the salary cap, but that number will only go down in the coming years, 59% this season. That's how it works for your 2-star players. That is what you want to have happen. So 4 years with 8% raises. That is the key thing that helped the Pacers separate from other teams, is the raises. They could offer more over 4 years than any other team. Siakam gets his security on the biggest deal he's gotten in the pros. And it's still possible, I suppose, that there's some like incentives in there or something like that. I would just assume it's a straight 4-year max with no options in there. But that's the reality for the Pacers. They were able to get it done with Pascal Siakam quickly and almost as early as possible. in this free agency. And that new rule comes to fruition that right after the finals, teams and players can now negotiate. Let me be clear about this, though. They still cannot officially sign him until the moratorium is over. That's when the league figures out their finances for the coming season. That's when free agency goes on for every other player who's switching teams and things like that. And then on the 6th, players can officially sign new deals with teams. So this is agreed to now. There is still over 2 weeks until this becomes an official contract. Of course, the Pacers can plan, but that is a new rule. And that always made a ton of sense to me because technically Siakam's contract runs until June 30th. He's on the Pacers roster right now. Why can't he and the Pacers talk about extensions or future contracts? They could talk about an extension today before they agreed to this. So why couldn't they talk about a different kind of contract? It was a stupid old rule, and this made a lot of sense. And now it can become official. On July 6th, 21.3 points and 7.8 rebounds per game. Did not miss a game due to injury after being traded to the Pacers. Another pro of the Siakam experience, has been at 60 plus. I suppose I'm trying to do the math. Okay, so the 2 shorter seasons, I can't do the percentage of games quickly, but almost always very available, right? His 2 lowest games played seasons were the ones that were the bubble shortened one and the following one that were shorter. So 80+% of games available, healthy, talented, 2-time All-NBA player, top 10 in MVP 1 year, 2-time All-Star, most improved winner, a champion. So many reasons that the Pacers would want to do this. I'm kind of just rambling about his credentials now. The deal makes sense to me from the Pacers' perspective. I bet they're happy to have gotten a 4th year in there, although 5 years is always exciting if you really believe in a guy. Siakam, 4 years for him, opens up options for an extension potentially in 2 years, opens up options for another 4-year deal at the end of this. Lines his contract up pretty handily with Haliburton, although 1 year short in total. A lot to like about this agreement for the Pacers, even though it's not quite the maximum value that was totally available. The Pacers said they wanted to get it done. Siakam talked about liking Indiana. And now it's done. Tomorrow on a full-length podcast, you'll get more from me on the deal, the agreement, why it makes sense, and then we'll really dive into what it means for everyone else, right? Obi Toppin, the luxury tax, other free agents, the draft, how it's all going to matter and come together. They now have 12 players as it stands with agreed-to contracts for next season. We'll see what ends up happening with Jalen Smith or Kendall Brown, but that's the current reality, and there's so much more to break down. You'll get all that tomorrow, but just now, my instant initial thoughts, what it means for the Pacers, what it means for Siakam, and where this goes. For more, Pacers on SI is where I have more of these details right now, and I'll have more about this in Forbes and other places. Thank you all for listening. Hope you're enjoying your Wednesday. This will probably be out. It doesn't matter. You can't tell. You're listening to this if it's already out. Hopefully, this comes out in a timely manner for you. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow, very soon, whenever.